Downing Thomas, and I'm Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs here at the University of Iowa. I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, very young and not so young, here to this special edition of WorldCanvass, held each year to mark the opening of International Education Week. International Education Week is a joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education, and helps to promote the value of programs that prepare Americans for a global environment and to attract future leaders from abroad to study, learn, and get involved here in the United States. It runs this year from November 12th to the 16th, and a number of programs and activities related to international education will be scheduled up to this week and during that week. Our November WorldCanvass is also the occasion each year at which the president or provost presents the university's International Impact Award to a distinguished individual who has made significant contributions internationally, or in the case of international alumni, who have made an impact abroad in their home countries. The International Impact Award was created in 2010 and was awarded that year to Dick and Mary Jo Stanley of Muscatine for their long-standing leadership in promoting the value of global connections and their generous support of international activities here at the University of Iowa. Last year's award went to Trudy Peterson for her commitment to safeguarding the historical and cultural records of peoples and nations. And I'm delighted this year to introduce Provost and Executive Vice President Barry Butler, who will present the award to this year's laureate, Hualing Nieh Engle. Barry?
Thank you, Downing. It's an honor to join you today to present the University of Iowa's International Impact Award. It's a particularly meaningful honor and pleasure to present this year's award to someone who holds such a special place in the life of our university, Professor Emerita Hualing Nieh Engle. Professor Engle was born and raised in mainland China, earned her degree in English from the National Central University in Nanjing, and relocated with her family to Taiwan in 1949. There, she became literary editor and then a member of the editorial board of a liberal intellectual magazine that promoted democracy and freedom. Later, she taught the first creative writing courses in Chinese at Taipei's two major universities. She had published a novel, several short story collections, and translations of American writers such as Henry James and William Faulkner by the time she met Paul Engle, then director of the Writers' Workshop, who invited her to come to Iowa. Happily, she did come to Iowa, and it was after she earned her MFA from the workshop in 1966 that she famously suggested to Paul that the university should start a program for international writers. Together, they proceeded to envision, create, nurture, and lead a world-class literary residency program that today, 45 years later, has brought more than 1,400 writers from more than 140 countries to Iowa City and has made Iowa essentially synonymous with writing across the globe. Hualing Engle co-directed the IWP with Paul until his retirement in 1977 and continued as sole director until 1988. Since her formal retirement from the university, she has continued to serve as a member of the IWP Advisory Board and to work with what current IWP Director Chris Merrill calls astonishing energy to bring the most talented and distinguished Chinese writers to Iowa City. From the moment she and Paul founded the IWP, Chris writes, quote, "Barely a day has passed in her life that has not been devoted to the strengthening of world literature and to its understanding, with the University of Iowa always at the center of that effort. Like no one else, Hualing Engle has truly brought the world to Iowa and Iowa to the world. We thank her for her vision, for the extraordinary voice she has shared with the world through her writing, and most of all, for her tireless efforts on behalf of the global community of writers. It's my great honor to present this year's International Impact Award to Hualing Engle. Would you please come forward to accept the award?
came to Iowa City University of Iowa in 1964. In 1967, so first of all, I want to share the award with Paul Engle. We started the International Writing Program together in 1967. That was during the Iron Curtain period. So it was very difficult to bring a writer from the Iron Curtain countries. And Paul and I would try everything possible to bring writers from those countries. And I would like to read you just a short poem from the writer from Romania. If life would put me in the position to be a pilot, to throw from a plane bombs over the earth of America, I never will throw a bomb, but a flower over the sweet earth of Iowa. And then a writer who was in the program Anata Moti, who was in the program 74, 75. At that time, the writers of the International Writing Program, they stay here at the university in the International Writing Program for whole school year. This writer, Anata Moti, from India, he said, there was no end to the reflections of Iowa, the International Writing Program, of Paul and Hualing Nieh, who bring writers from all parts of the world to Iowa City and care for them. It's something much like what Hemingway said of Paris. If you are lucky enough to have lived there, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you, for it is a movable feast. Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you all for coming.
I want to say something. The former president, Sandy Boyd, it's such a wonderful surprise to see you here. When I became the director in 1977, it was during President Sandy Boyd's presidency. He was the president. He was so supportive of the International Writing Program. Whatever I asked for on behalf of the program, he would say, yes, pass. Special thing.
What else could I do?
You could say no.
No, it was not possible to ever say no to you or to Paul. I know there are other people in this room who've knew Paul for many years, but Susan and I came here in the fall of 1954, and she had been a reporter on the Minneapolis paper and also a writer. She had been one of Wallace Stegner's first fellowship holders at Stanford, and Stegner had been in this program. So she wrote to Paul, and we hadn't been in Iowa City for more than a few minutes when Paul embraced us. And once he embraced you, you were never able to get out of his clutches again. But he was an extraordinary person. And I think particularly about 1965 with Paul and Hualing, because at that time I was doing what Barry does now. Paul had made a movie, had a movie made in the university which were really about the beginnings of the workshop, although he didn't have the writer's program, even though he didn't know it. He put in juxtaposition, and you were in one of the scenes, a foreign author with an American author, a poet or a fiction writer. And so then the question came, who was going to pay for the movie? And he had gone around, as we all did in those days, and got $100 here and $100 from that department. And they didn't want to pay up. And so finally it fell my lot to get them all together in a meeting over in what we call Seashore Hall now. So I had them all there, and everybody was mad as they could be. And I sat down and I looked at them and I started to laugh. And I said, you know, anybody that can tie this many people up about so little money deserves the money, so the meeting's adjourned. But also in 1965, I found myself as the interim dean of engineering. And things were kind of tense over there, and they hadn't had a faculty gathering for a number of years. And so Susan and I hosted an event in the union, and the star of the event was Hualing. She came and performed and read her poetry in 1965, and she was the hit of the evening. So I owe a lot to you.
Well, Hualing, take us back. Tell us a little bit about the earlier part of your life. Some of the people here don't know about your earlier life, living on mainland China and then living in Taiwan.
Oh, good question.
Tell us a little bit about how you got here.
You can take it. I went to, my father, when I was 11, my father was killed by the communists. So when the communists were taking over China mainland, I just couldn't stay there. So I took my family at 24. I was 24, took my whole family, my mother, my sister, my brother, took them to Taiwan. But then in Taiwan, I immediately joined the liberal magazine, Free China. It was a very outspoken magazine. So that just fit me very well. And then the Joan Kjaer's government at that time was very oppressive. And after the magazine had been running for 11 years, in 1960, it was closed down by Joan Kjaer's government, and 4 people were arrested. I survived that arrest because my father had been killed by the communists. So that's the life there. So I stayed there. I didn't know what I could get out. Then Paul Engle went to Taiwan in 1963 to recruit in all of Asia. He traveled all over Asia to recruit writers from Asia. He went to Taiwan. I met him at a party, a welcome party for him. Then he said, well, because at the time, I had a few stories translated in English. I don't know who gave this translation to him, so he had read me. And he said, I know your name, so I would love to have lunch with you. I said, fine. So at lunch, we talked about writing, about Iowa, and then I came in 1964. So that's how I'm here. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Sandy, let me ask you another question about the way universities and organizations operate. Is charisma, like the charisma that apparently Paul Engle had, is that an important feature in getting things done?
Well, he was an enormous pest. And it was one way of getting him out of the office. But no, he was an entrepreneur, and he did not ever cry that he didn't, well, he did cry that he didn't have enough money constantly, but he went out and got it. So he had a very strong working relationship with the Hill Family Foundation in St. Paul, which is now Northwest Foundation. He worked with other people around the country, and then nobody in town or Cedar Rapids was safe, and so he would go up and just a little more, I just need a little more, I just need a little more, and so you give a little more, it was like church. And so, but he was an incredible figure. I remember one day, he had an event, a bunch of writers had come, and it must have been in the late 50s or early 60s, and we were down in the basement of the Union. And he said, this is called the River Room. And the reason it's called the River Room is because it looks like the river went through it. And the river, of course, on occasion did. But he was able to name everybody in that room by just memory, just going around introducing them. So that made a very big hit on anybody that he ever met. He never forgot. Sometimes you wished he had, but...
Did I read it? I would like to read it.
Oh, I think you did, but you can read it again.
did.
You did. Hualing, when you came here to be in the writer's workshop in '64, Who were some of the other writers? Are there people you remember?
Adam is is an odd group of writers, just 4 or 5 or 6. One from Afghanistan, one from Hualing Nieh Engle, I still remember his name, from the Philippines and from Korea, from Japan. We were just an odd group of people. We really were not that young anymore. And we had started to maybe publish one book or two. So, really, that's how I started to have the idea. So there should be a special program for these other people who are from other countries. They were not known here, and we were really lost. That's how I got this idea. And it was started at the International Writing Program, 1967. So we had just a few writers, just maybe 10 writers. Then it expanded, and I have to say special thank you to Chris Merrill. We never had over 30 writers. I don't know how you handle them.
We don't.
Yeah, well, this is a good time to turn it to you, I think, Chris, to tell us what, you came here, 10, 12 years ago, and took over the International Writing Program and have developed it much further, and we'll talk about that later. But you came into this experience with Hualing and the sort of the history of Paul Engle. What did you think about the IWP when you first took this on?
Well, I came in 2000, and the job was to rebuild the program because it had fallen apart, and in the late 90s. And from the beginning, Hualing was a great ally. And in fact, I think within about 2 weeks of my arrival, she insisted that we have lunch with Sandy. And I don't know if you remember this lunch. And I had met Sandy once, and I understood that he was very important. And we sat down at this lunch, and Hualing looked at Sandy. The first thing she said to him was, "Sandy, I read that letter you sent out about estate planning. Why don't you give your estate to the IWP?" And I, in my polite way, I thought, this seems a little forward. And then I saw Sandy about a week or so later, and I mentioned this event, and Sandy said to me 2 things that I've always kept in mind. He said, well, how do you think that Paul and Hualing made this program work? By being so direct. And then he said, and you'll notice how easily I deflected the request. So I learned 2 important lessons right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're very honored to have a good friend of yours here, and I would like to have your friend come up and join us now, who's flown all the way from Hong Kong to join us on this special evening.
Yao Ming Pon. He was also one word. He was in the International Writing Program in 1983. And now he is a big shot, big editor-in-chief of the leading intellectual magazine in Chinese. He made a special trip coming back to Iowa just for this occasion. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I know a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a long trip for me to come here from Hong Kong. I have to say a few words. First of all, I must to say, Hualing not only belong to Iowa, she also belong to Hong Kong. And Hualing is belong to the world. Secondly, Hualing and Engle treat IWP as a home of writers. We IWP writers are in a family circle. We many writers call Hualing Ma. I came here because Iowa is my second home. My Ma is here. Lastly, I want to say Hualing is such successful. We all feel very proud. Thanks.
So, Mr. Poon, you are an alum of the International Writing Program. You were here as a writer in 1983.
1983.
Yeah. And when had you heard about the International Writing Program? How did you hear about it?
At that time, we have some Hong Kong writer have been here, and I was told by them, and they are very writers program is very helpful to the writers, and they learn a lot, especially because there's space and the writer can exchange its opinion, each other, and very open. At that time, there's a first time Taiwan's writer and Mainland's writer to join together in 1979. It's first time. China Mainland writers and China Taiwan's writer, they meet in Iowa.
Really?
So this Hualing create the chance. And 1983, I remember there's East German's writer and West German's writer. They are first to meet here. And East German's writer is a lady, is a beautiful lady. And the West German's writer is a gentleman. And they meet here, and they fall in love.
West German writer and an East German writer met here and fell in love here.
And they fell in love.
In love, and it's very very beautiful story. That happened in Iowa, in IWP.
Very good. Yeah, I remember that.
A lot of that happens in the IWP, huh, Chris?
It is the love boat, yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, Mr. Poon, you are chief editor of an important monthly in Hong Kong and chairman of the Hong Kong Writers Association.
Yes.
What does Hualing's writing mean to people from Hong Kong?
I read all Hualing's works, and we published Hualing's novel around in 1980, and there's and we translate Paul Engle's poem in Chinese, and we published Hong Kong too, and she's very her novel very popular in Hong Kong and China. China Mainland and China Taiwan also.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And Hualing, anything else you'd like to say while you're here?
I'm overwhelmed with so many people, friends, all of them that are here. I'm really overwhelmed. I didn't expect at my age I would have such a big honor. No, really, it's such a wonderful surprise. Wow. You have been working so hard.
Oh, no.
Many times.
Pleasure. It's an honor for us to have you here. And so I hope everyone will show you their appreciation with a nice round of applause. Thank you.
at the University of Iowa, you are my friend I've known the longest in Iowa City, right? Yeah. And she used to come to our house when Paul was there too. Before she entered the house, she said, "I'm coming!"
Natasha will help you come. Natasha will take you now.
Oh, take a minute.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any.
So I'm here with Chris Merrill, and we're going to talk just a little bit more now about the continuation of the International Writing Program since those early years, and we've already had a little taste of that, but you're doing so many things, and as Hualing mentioned, this year you have over 30 writers here. The program has grown in these last years. You've been in charge with, I must say, a very small staff working very hard to make this program successful. So tell us about the IWP in 2012.
Well, what we do now is just building on what Paul and Hualing created all those years ago, and I love the story of the West German writer meeting the East German writer and falling in love, and the Chinese writers from Hong Kong and the mainland and Taiwan coming together, because that's really what we do, is when we say we bring the world to Iowa, we bring writers from lots of different places. This year, 31 writers from 28 countries, and they have put on something like 125 public events. Yeah. And as he said, it's with a small staff that we keep all this together. But what they do is the writers come here, as they always have, to write, to trade ideas and impressions with one another, to have a chance to engage with a lot of different kinds of audiences. We had some writers who went out yesterday to Solstead, to Chuck Peters' farm, and we have a little movie of some of our writers driving a tractor, which is a scary thought. The other day, we had the writers out to the harvest party at the Danes' farm, and another writer there drove, I've just learned today, a golf cart over some bicycles. So we spend, I tell you, my email is really interesting.
I bet. I bet it is. Well, in addition to that, we've talked very often about the cultural diplomacy role that writers can play, and programs like this can play. Tell us a little bit about how writing, and particularly this kind of writing project, aids in cultural diplomacy.
Yeah. Well, cultural diplomacy is a part of that larger idea of public diplomacy, the trading of information and ideas, people-to-people exchanges, the sense that when people get together, they find out that they have much more in common than divides them. In our program, historically, we have almost always had Israeli and Palestinian writers here at the same time. They almost always argue when they first arrive, and almost always are fast friends by the time they leave, because they find out that they share a lot of things. They are divided by profound political differences, but writers discover other grounds of commonality. And that's what governs a lot of what we do. But I was just thinking, when the writers brought together in 1983, I think one of the writers was Hualing Nieh, right? From the mainland, from Shanghai. A few years ago, we had a program there. We brought young writers together. We'll be talking about it later today, called Life of Discovery, young American and young Chinese writers. And it turns out that when Hualing Nieh was here 20 years ago, she was so impressed by the Writers' Workshop and by the International Writing Program that she has gone and created a similar kind of program in Shanghai. And so I think that what happens in cultural diplomacy at its best, people find good ideas, and then they take them to other places and translate them into their own surroundings, and then new works get created.
Well, I understand that Paul Engle worked with the State Department, Kennedy administration, and can you tell us anything about that?
Well, from the very beginning, Paul understood that this, as Sandy was talking about, knowing where money is, I think he understood that there would be money at the State Department for this kind of cultural exchange. And we've had a really terrific relationship with the State Department now for 45 years. And indeed, a lot of the programs that we do, that are a part of the fall residency and that then extend beyond come out of ideas generated in Washington, and they are designed to figure out ways to, again, bring writers into some sort of conversation.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned East Germany, West Germany. We've talked about China and Taiwan and bringing writers together from countries that weren't always on the best of terms. Right now, you have a writer from, I think, Afghanistan, don't you?
Yeah. We've got a writer from Afghanistan. We've had this fall also a writer from Iraq, actually our first Kurdish writer from Iraq. And we've also brought writers out to, as in State Department parlance, to places of strategic interest. We brought writers to Afghanistan, to Pakistan. I just traveled to Baghdad last week to see what we might be able to put together as we start to normalize our relations with Iraq. The exchange of writers and of artists, of musicians, of dancers, at some point will become part of what goes on between our two countries.
So is some of the funding, I take it funding is a big element of this relationship with the State Department, because clearly it's expensive to bring in more than 30 people for a 10-week residency and to do everything you do here.
Yeah, but the writers, so we have 31 writers from 28 countries, and about half of them were paid for by the State Department or embassies. And the other half come from the same sorts of fundraising efforts that Paul did, establishing bilateral relationships with cultural ministries around the world, trying to ask people for money. And of course, we had an incredible gift given to us this summer, an anonymous gift of $500,000, which that Hualing has turned into the Paul and Hualing Engle Fellowship that will bring us a Chinese writer every year from here into eternity, and as well as a writer from another part of the world.
Wow, that's a testament. Yes, please.
But get on the mic.
I forgot to say, Mo Yan, the fiction writer of China, he just won this year's Nobel Prize for Literature.
And actually, and Mo Yan is the second IWP writer to win the Nobel Prize in 6 years. Yeah, Orhan Pamuk, the Turkish novelist.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking throughout this program about various projects that the IWP is involved in, and a little later we'll be talking about Book Wings and about the Whitman Web. So there is a lot going on here. What do you think the public here in Iowa should know about the International Writing Program, or anything related to writing that exists here in Iowa around all of us?
Well, the funny thing is, when I was thinking about taking this job, I remember I was in contact with a writer in Romania by email, and I said, I'm thinking of taking this job in Iowa. And she wrote back immediately to say, oh, definitely take that job. Iowa, it's where all the writers are. So that's because of what Paul and Hualing did. The legacy, their legacy is that writers all around the world know that this is a place where creativity is honored, where trying to make a poem or a story or a play is something that we take really seriously. I joke with people that I live in a city that if you tell them you're a poet, they say, oh, wow, that's great. Anywhere else in America, you say you're a poet, you feel like, they look at you like, oh, I'm so sorry. Maybe one day you'll grow up. Right? But so it gives us, we live in a place that's, it's rightfully a UNESCO City of Literature because we honor the word, and so when you bring writers together here from around the world, as every Friday we have these panel discussions in the library at the Iowa City Public Library, and the writers bring up such interesting ideas about how they do their work, the things that they're thinking about, and what we discover is that the problems that writers face before the blank page or the blank screen are pretty similar around the world, and we all have interesting strategies for trying to overcome those problems and write new work. And we discover along the way that we are involved in a common endeavor.
Yeah. Well, you've been a writer at least all of your adult life and continue to write even though you're busy with this program. What have you learned from these various writers? Is there any particular trick along the way that you learned or some sort of focus strategy?
The one thing that I've learned is that what distinguishes writers is that they write. They get up every day and write, no matter how they feel, no matter what they do. I remember we had a writer from Georgia some years ago who used to go down the hall of the Iowa House Hotel where the writers stay with a soccer ball at 6:30 in the morning, and he would kick the ball against different writers' doors to say, get up, write, you know?
Yeah.
And he wrote a whole book while he was here. It's a bestseller in Georgia, and it's all about Iowa and about his fellow writers. I hate to think how he has portrayed some of them, and I hate to think how he's portrayed me. But
Yeah. Oh, well, you did mention quickly that we're a UNESCO City of Literature. It's worth mentioning that, again, I see John Kenyon here, who is heading up that organization now. I know that you played a major role in preparing all the materials that needed to go to UNESCO to get the city recognized, along with Edinburgh and Melbourne and Dublin and a couple of other cities. What does it mean to be a UNESCO City of Literature?
well, first I should say that the idea for us applying to the UNESCO Creative Cities Network came from my associate director, Hugh Ferrer. We were putting together a white paper for the provost had then put together, had assembled a working group on the Writing University. And as we were inventorying our resources, our literary resources, he came across this UNESCO Creative Cities Network. Hugh Ferrer said to me, you know, I think we fit all the criteria. But the cities in the Creative Cities Network were, you know, Edinburgh, they were Berlin, they were Kobe, Japan. And
Yeah.
so when I contacted the headquarters in Paris and said, would you entertain a dossier from Iowa City? And they replied immediately and said, we've been waiting for you to apply, because they felt that we really had, we were what they viewed as a creative city. And so now we're in a network with there are over 30 creative cities. There are 6 in literature, Dublin, Prague is on the way in, Reykjavik, Melbourne, Edinburgh.
And Norwich?
In Norwich, England. I'm trying right now. In Baghdad last week, I met with the Deputy Minister of Culture, and in the course of that meeting, we came up with the idea that Baghdad has such a long and distinguished history as a center of learning in the Middle East that maybe as they start to rebuild the country, they could start working toward applying for the UNESCO Cities of Literature. So, you know, that seems almost impossible to imagine until you look at all the writers there and you think, you know, in their own way, that there might be some hope there too.
Yeah, terrific. Well, stay here, please, and we're going to invite our next guests up as well to join us and talk a little bit more about Chinese literature. I'd like to welcome 2 of the writers from this year's residency, Lin Chen-Ying and Stephanie Ye. If you would please come on up here. And also Jennifer Feely, please join us as well. As they approach, I'll read a little bit about our guests. Please, Lin and Stephanie, come up to join us. And so, hi. Lin Chen-Ying is a fiction writer from Taiwan. He's the author of an essay collection and 7 short story collections, including The Longest Summer, A Burning Notebook, and The Garden of Mirrors. His novel, The Nostalgia That Dare Not Speak Its Name, received the 2012 Taipei International Book Exhibition Prize. And Lin has worked as a copywriter, newspaper editor, and in television. Welcome. Thank you for coming, Lin. And Stephanie Ye is a fiction writer from Singapore. Stephanie has been published in journals such as the Quarterly Literary Review Singapore, Mascara Literary Review, and Sci-Fi Short Story Magazine. Her first solo publication is a chapbook titled The Billion Shop. She's worked as a copy editor, arts reporter, and a book critic for the Straits Times. So welcome to both of you. And Jennifer Feely, nice to see you again. You've been on this program before, and good to see you. Jennifer is an assistant professor of modern Chinese literature here at the University of Iowa. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is read an excerpt from Hualing's work. I believe Lin will read the excerpt in Chinese, and then Stephanie will read us the same excerpt in English, so we can enjoy a little bit of Hualing's writing. So please, Lin, whenever you're ready.
Okay. The title is 地你却填海， 太阳神炎帝有一个女儿叫女娲。有一天，她驾着一艘小船到东海去玩，海上兴起风浪，把小船打翻了，女娲死在海里。她不甘心死，她变成一只小鸟，叫帝女雀，花脑袋、白嘴壳、红脚爪，住在发鸠山上。帝女雀要把大海填平，她从发鸠山衔一粒小石子飞到东海，把小石子投在海里。她就那么日夜不停地来回飞着，一次衔一粒小石子。大海大吼：“小鸟，算了吧，就是千年万年，你也休想把我大海填平。”帝女雀向大海投下一粒小石子，哪怕就是100万年、千万年、万万年，一直到世界末日，我也要把你大海填平。东海大笑：“那你就填下去吧，傻鸟儿。”帝女雀飞回发鸠山，又衔了一粒小石子，又飞到东海，又把小石子投在海里。直到今天，帝女雀还在那儿来回飞着。
Thank you.
Right. Now I'll read that in English. That was the epilogue of Hualing Nieh's novel Mulberry and Peach. And the title is Princess Bird and the Sea. One day, Nuwa, daughter of the sun god Yenti, set sail to the East Sea in a small boat. There is a storm, and the boat capsizes. Nuwa drowns, but she refuses to die. She turns into a bird with a blue head, white beak, and red claws. She is called Princess Bird and goes to live on Ringdove Mountain. Princess Bird wants to fill in the sea and turn it into solid ground. She flies to the East Sea, then drops a pebble in the water. She flies back and forth, day and night. Each trip, she takes another pebble. The sea roars, "Little bird, don't think that you can fill me in, even if you take thousands and millions of years." Princess Bird drops another pebble into the sea and says, "I will do it if it takes me billions and trillions of years until the end of the world. I will fill you in." The East Sea bursts out laughing. "Go ahead, you silly bird." Princess Bird is flying back and forth between the sea and the mountain. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our two readers there were Lin Chun Ying and Stephanie Ye. Thank you so much. And the writing was by Hualing. So I would like to turn now to you, Jennifer. You're a specialist in Chinese literature, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about where Hualing's writing fits into the Chinese landscape.
Sure. I mean, I'd actually like to comment on the book they just read from, because I taught this my first year teaching at the University of Iowa, and Hualing actually came to my class. I don't know if you remember. This was a long time ago. You came and my students interviewed you. And at the end of the term, they all said universally this was their favorite book from the semester. And I don't want to embarrass her or her grandchildren, but what they really found very provocative about the book was its bold depiction of female sexuality, which was really shocking to them because books we had read before this were a lot more conservative. And for those of you who haven't read the book, she does something very clever, which is to portray the fragmentary nature of what's happening with China and Taiwan. She creates a woman protagonist who has multiple personalities. And it's a wonderful narrative where she's running away from the INS agent and sort of taunting him. And so they were really, really impressed with how she wove in psychoanalytic theory as well as sexuality. And this was really, really shocking to them compared to what they had read before. And it left such a deep impact on my students. And she's really one of the early Taiwanese modernists, which some people don't realize, but she was doing this back in the 1960s and 70s. It's very impressive.
And what's the name of the book that we heard the excerpt
Mulberry
from?
and Peach.
Mulberry and Peach.
So that's
Great.
the name of the two women,
Yeah.
the two personalities.
Yeah.
And it's available in an English translation, right?
Yes.
Ah, good. Yeah, great. So, so you have a good experience, not only personally with Hualing, but also with her writing. What can you tell us about trends in Chinese literature? What are the most interesting genres to follow these days?
Well, I mean, I'd first like to go actually back to her work because we keep on talking about her in the context of Chinese literature, but I think we should also talk about her work in the context of American literature. And I don't think there's any reason that American literature only has to be written in English. I mean, we're a university that has a creative writing program in Spanish, and maybe one day in Chinese, if Hualing, gets up the nerve to, to start one. But I think that, her work is really interesting because it's, in the film that Angie made, she keeps on talking about, I'm an outsider. I'm on the outside of the outside. And a lot of recent trends actually in Chinese literary studies are to take works from the outside, from the periphery, and put them back into the center. So not just looking at works from mainland China, but looking at works from people in the diaspora, whether it's written in Chinese by people overseas or even works written in English as well, that there are multiple constructions of what can constitute Chinese literature. And I think that's really important. And I think that the way Hualing describes herself with her tree metaphor is really lovely because she talks about her roots being in the mainland, and the trunk is in Taiwan, and the branches and leaves are in Iowa. And you'll notice that in that metaphor, there's nothing that is in conflict with one another. She's able to be a Chinese writer, a Taiwanese writer, and an American writer. And as Mr. Pan told us, they also want to embrace her as a Hong Kong writer, because when she was publishing, the only place she could publish was Hong Kong. She couldn't publish in the mainland. She couldn't publish in Taiwan, only in Hong Kong. So we can see that she's truly a world writer. It's extremely impressive.
And you've become personal friends.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about working at University of Iowa is Hualing. I can say that without a doubt that she's my favorite thing about Iowa City. So she's truly a living treasure. So we're very lucky to have her.
We heard mention earlier from Hualing that Mo Yan had won the Nobel Prize, and Chris mentioned the second IWP writer who's won the Nobel, which is quite amazing, I think. And what can you tell us about Mo Yan? Many of us don't know his writing.
Well, in the statement that they made, the Nobel Prize Committee, when they said they awarded it to him, they described his work as hallucinatory realism, which I think is just another way of saying magical realism, that he's been influenced a lot by Latin American literature. And I mean, Mo Yan is really important. Sometimes people classify him in a group of root-seeking literature, but I think it's much more than that. And for Mo Yan, if you read his work, sense of place is quite important. He often writes about his hometown of Gaomi in Shandong province. And his language is really wonderful. And I think that comes out mostly in Howard Goldblatt's translations. But I think it's also important to remember that Mo Yan is only one small thread of Chinese literature, that there are also urban writers, there are more avant-garde writers, so he's just one strand of this. And so we shouldn't conflate Mo Yan with all of Chinese literature. And maybe Chris wants to add something about Mo Yan.
Yeah, is there anything you would want to add to that?
No, that's a great summary. Of course, I only can read the English translations, but I can say that we were lucky enough to have the poet Xi Chuan in the program some years ago, and I think most people around the world view him as one of the world's really great poets. And I feel like he's a poet that I was reading him early this morning. Once again, he inspires me to want to write.
Xi Chuan or Mo Yan?
Xi Chuan.
Yeah. I actually have a story. Before I came to Iowa, when I was still a graduate student, I was doing research in Beijing, and Xi Chuan and Mo Yan invited me to a dinner with people from Chinese Central Television. So I went there, and the only two people who would talk to me were Xi Chuan and Mo Yan, because the CCTV people only wanted to talk to Mo Yan and Xi Chuan because they were these elevated writers, and I was just a nobody graduate student. And they were so kind to me. And what was really interesting was in the conversation it came out how without Mo Yan, we may not have the director Zhang Yimou or the actress Gong Li, these very famous luminaries in Chinese cinema, because Zhang Yimou's first film was Red Sorghum, based on Mo Yan's Red Sorghum family novel.
And we had the good luck to have for several years running, writers who had done movies with Zhang Yimou. And there was an American consular official who would be processing the visas for these writers. And when this official would see on their CVs that they had done movies with Zhang Yimou, he would say, "And do you know Gong Li, the very beautiful actress?" And they would always say, "Oh, yes, oh, yes." And he'd say, "Could you introduce me to her?" And the writers would always say, "Oh, yes." And they'd get a visa that afternoon.
And did they ever introduce?
No, no. They left him wanting more.
So Jennifer, when you think about Chinese literature, I know one of the things that was interesting to me last year when we did a program that actually you and your colleague were sort of the instigators of. It was a program on global science fiction, and you mentioned that science fiction is very popular in China.
Well, I mean, mainland China is the largest market for science fiction, just because it's the largest market for anything. But right, yeah. But it's really popular among young people, and the internet is really helping that. And the internet is also helping them to bypass censorship. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
That might be a moment to ask Stephanie to tell us about one of her road trips here to James Kirk's future birthplace.
Oh yeah, as you guys might know, Riverside, which is about, I guess, half an hour's drive from here, it's supposed to be where Captain James T. Kirk from Star Trek is going to be born, like a few centuries from now. So I went to visit, and it was fun. But Riverside is a very small town, which I had never experienced before in the US. So that was a very interesting experience. Regarding science fiction, well, I don't really know if I like it because I'm Chinese. Yeah, but Singapore is kind of an interesting little country. Some people would say it's very science fiction-like in certain ways. So yeah, maybe that's why I like science fiction so much. Unfortunately, I don't really read much science fiction in Chinese because basically I don't read that much in Chinese, even though I am ethnic Chinese myself. In Singapore, we mainly speak English, and we mainly read English books. So I'm much more up to date with all the British and American writers, not so much Chinese writers. So being here in Iowa has been amazing because I've gotten to meet Chunying, I've gotten to meet Chi-Tak from Hong Kong, and it's just been great to kind of be considered one of them, considered a Chinese writer, even though I'm kind of like going under. Yeah, I'm kind of like getting it just by association. And the three of us had a really great trip to Nebraska about a month ago, where we spoke at 2 universities, including Nebraska Wesleyan. I can see Professor James Shea is here. Hi. Yeah. So, and we had a great time, just talking to students, talking about being Chinese in all these different countries, places in the world. Yeah, so it's just been such a great experience.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. And we'll be able to talk with you later in another segment about your experiences of Iowa and the Midwest. What more should we say about Chinese literature? What are some names that people might want to look for today in translation, of course?
I think you can just watch Angie's film, and basically every writer whom she interviews from China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, is one of the big names, in Chinese literature. And, including Mo Yan is in her film. And if you guys haven't seen it, there's going to be an encore screening, I believe, after this program, and you should all stay and watch it. But, I mean, from the mainland, the fiction writers that she has in her film are Mo Yan, Ge Fei, Li Rui, Chi Zijian, Su Tong, Yu Hua. I mean, lots of people from the mainland, from Hong Kong, Dong Qizhang, and we have, Chen Zhide, who's here in the program, and we also have a writer from last year, Xie Xiaohong, who's in the audience from Hong Kong. These are all really brilliant young writers, and then Taiwan, we have him. Last year we had a wonderful writer here named Su Weizhen. Just really, there are too many to name. And I think that the wonderful thing about Chinese literature is the diversity. And you can just find everything these days. And unfortunately, not enough has been translated. So I fear that people might be misled to think that all of Chinese literature is set in the past and in the countryside. But that's not true at all. Especially if you look at Hong Kong literature or a lot of Taiwanese literature, you see really interesting urban stories. So, hopefully we'll have more translated.
Well, and you and Chris both have an interesting vantage point, being professors here at the University of Iowa. You've seen the great increase in numbers of Chinese students studying here on our campus, making friends with students from Iowa and other places in the world. And there's a growing interest in studying Chinese language here too, isn't there?
I believe so.
Yeah. So, well, wonderful. We're going to go next to the film you just spoke about. We're going to be talking with Angie Chen and also with Sun Wei, who will be coming up here. Is there anything more we should say in this segment before we break? Anything further? Well, then thank you so much. We'll see you later, Lynn, and we'll see you later, Stephanie, and thank you, Jennifer. Thanks. So I would ask Angie to please come up, and also Sun Wei. This is WorldCanvass from International Programs. I'm Joan Kjaer, and we invite you to join us as a member of the live audience for our next program on December 7th, when the topic will be Globalization and the World Economy. All WorldCanvass programs are broadcast on UI TV, Iowa Public Radio, and KRUI FM. They can be accessed anywhere in the world through iTunes and the Public Radio Exchange. So just getting settled right now are Angie Chen, Hong Kong filmmaker, who discusses One Tree, Three Lives, a 2012 feature-length documentary about the life and times of Hualing Nieh. Angie is here with the red turtleneck. And just next to her is Sun Wei. Very nice to meet you, Wei. And she'll be speaking with us a little bit later about her recent arrival here in Iowa City to take part in the International Writing Program. So first, let me go, of course everybody knows Chris Merrill, and let me go first to you, Angie. As was mentioned, your film, One Tree, Three Lives, following the title that Hualing created for her book. Your film premiered in Hong Kong, and you recently had a showing at the Landlocked Film Festival here in Iowa City. And tonight, after our program, during the reception, the film will be shown downstairs in the Senate chamber, the same level where we'll have our reception. So if you have a chance, stop in and see as much of the film as you can. But tell us about your interest in Hualing. When did you come to the idea to make a film about Hualing?
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to say it's such an honor and a privilege to be here today. We just flew in, just like Poon, from Hong Kong. I now live in Hong Kong. And also, we're here to bring the film back to Iowa City, the documentary, One Tree, Three Lives. I would like to say, first of all, about the film and about the person that I know. We have a very special relationship. I call Hualing Nieh Engle Nieh Ayi. In Chinese, that means Auntie Nieh. It's a very kind of affectionate term that we have, because the reason being, actually, her daughters and me, we were junior high school schoolmates in Taiwan. Did it all the way back in the 60s. So we were teenagers, and I would always go to her home sometimes and play with my two schoolmates. And I always remember her being a very beautiful woman, always dressed in a nice qipao, and she was always very warm to me. So anyway, back to this, and then subsequently, actually, I have to give this background information about this, then I can go into the film.
Yes,
all right?
yes, yes.
And then but after that, between 1969 and 1973, I came to Iowa City, and I studied here, and I got my BA and my MA degree from the film department, the Communication Studies department. And then also, I was the official Chinese folk song singer for the program. You wouldn't believe it. I only had a handful of songs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I would tag along to, they would tour America. We would tour America with the writers and with the Engles. And I would be singing, and they would be, giving recitals. And I provided the relief, the entertainment, so to speak, yes. So anyway, so I went back to Hong Kong, and I'm a filmmaker, as we all know right now. And I remember in 2009, I was going through some old papers of mine. I was tidying my study up, and I came across this letter from Paul Engle. I really have forgotten all about it. And he stated in the letter, he said, I approve your proposal of making this a documentary on me. And I remember I asked him, I wrote him, I asked him if I could do a documentary on him, and he said yes. And this very short, very precise, language, and it's scribbly. I don't know if you remember. Paul Engle always writes in this really scribbly sort of way. So, of course, that letter brought back, me back to memory lane, and I remember all the good old days here. And, of course, it was a bit late. I never got it made. He passed on in 1991. So when I got that letter, impulsively, I picked up the phone, and I rang her up. I rang Hualing Engle up. And I said, "Hi, Nieh, I says, can I do a documentary on you?" And in her usual ringing laughter, I think you all probably know her well, and she says, "Ha, ha, 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 ha. Of course, yes." And that actually started this documentary. And thank goodness we finished this year. We spent 3 years doing this. We followed her. We came to Iowa City. We followed her to Taiwan, Hong Kong, and then we also went to Beijing, and we had the good fortune of interviewing a number of the prominent Chinese writers this day. It was really, really my fortune. So anyway, the film, yes, you will have an opportunity to view it, I think at 7 p.m. It's going to be showing downstairs again. Well, it's a film about Mrs. Engle, 1 tree, 3 lives.
So you look at each of those 3 lives. She already talked about the 3, or I guess Jennifer mentioned the 3 stages of her life. And so you go way back to the time in China?
Yes, yes. It's really a biography of Hualing. Yeah, the film is all about her from the day she was in China to now, and she's still in Iowa City. And such a wonderful, she is a woman, I think, of exceptional courage, I think, and compassion and conviction, a woman that I know. And I can never forget her kindness towards me when I was in Iowa. So I think, I just want to say thank you very much, Nieh, and my love to you, and my love to every one of you here.
Thank you.
I remember actually, I remember this great line that Mr. Engle said. He said, "I could not move mountains, but I can make light." And I look right now, today, right now, I look across the room and I can see the light that she has made. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris, that makes me think of a piece you wrote for the Press Citizen this week. Many of you may have read it, where Chris mentioned the title, I think, was Hospitality, and he wove this notion of Hualing's warm and welcoming ways into her larger life and the influence she's had here on the world, really.
I was thinking in this film, which is really beautiful, and the music is quite moving, and there's so many bits in it that are moving, and then there are funny bits. But there's this little scene toward the end where Hualing is talking to the great writer Bifei Yu, and she mentions that over 600 writers have eaten meals at her dining room table, but Bifei Yu talks about sitting at the table with her, and Hualing would push some food his way, and when she turned away, he would push it back toward the middle, and then she would push it back. And I thought that's a nice image of what Hualing does. She just keeps pushing the food toward you.
Very true.
Yeah. Well, let's bring our next guest into the discussion as well. You are Sun Wei, and very nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's my honor to be here.
Well, thank you. And I would like to talk with you a little bit about your experience here in Iowa City, and I'll start with asking Chris to describe what the Life of Discovery group is so that he can give you a bit of an introduction.
So the Life of Discovery comes out of a grant we had from the State Department, and the notion was to create an exchange with younger Chinese writers. And we're just completing our 3rd cycle. We've been working very closely with the Chinese Writers Association. Wu Xinwei is somewhere in the audience, way back there. I've had the good luck to work with her over these years, and the notion was to put American and Chinese writers together both in China and here in the United States and have them work together. The life of discovery is a definition of creativity coined by the late poet and thinker Brewster Giesland. And we thought, let's see if we can bring writers together to read texts in common, maybe to do some creative writing exercises, to travel in common. And they've gone to lots of different parts of China, to Dunhuang, to Kunming, to Shanghai, to Beijing, and then come to this country and worked and been a part of the IWP during the fall residency. And the idea is to see what sorts of new connections we might be able to create.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I'll give a little of your background. Sun Wei is a Chinese novelist, a short story writer, and essayist. Born in 1973 in Shanghai, she grew up in a family of intellectuals. Wei received her BA in journalism from Fudan University in 1996 and her master's in international business administration from Shanghai University of Finance and Economics in 2001. She started writing fairy tales and novels in her teenage years, and the overarching theme of her work is the malaise in an increasingly materialistic world, with a fickle and fast-developing economy in China as the social background. She's published 13 books and over 20 novels and novelettes. So you're a very accomplished writer.
Thank you.
You've done a lot in a few years. Yeah. So what do you write about? What are the topics you're most interested in writing about?
I mean, as you mentioned, that my topic is the Malay. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, the Malays in contemporary China, and you know, in the last 30 years, beginning with a very big change, that suddenly the economy in China developed incredibly rapidly, and it always reminded me of the sentence in the novel, A Tale of Two Cities. This is the best of times. This is the worst of times. Yeah. This is the age of wisdom. This is the age of foolishness. Yes. Yeah, right. I think I'm really lucky that I have so many writing material here. Yeah. Yeah. And the people, I mean, the economy developed so quickly, so rapidly that it is like both miracle and a disaster happened to people's life. People are standing on this high-speed train. They try to balance themselves, but they failed. They are too busy to know who they are. Yeah. So I think that actually in 1980s, Hualing Nieh Engle came to China, that she has predicted this situation. She's very wise. I'm her reader since I was in middle school, and I love her works. Also, I love this project. I think this is a legend. Yeah.
Do you see among your own friends, people your own age, do you see the struggle they have in this current economy, working hard, maybe moving from one place to another for a new job? What are the things you see among the people you know that help you write what you need to write about China today?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the stories that you see around you with friends and family?
Yeah. Actually, I have write a lot, so I mean, I can write, but I'm not good at speaking these things. I think, yeah, so I can't speak, so I write. And I think that they are faced so many. Actually, it is a very good experiment on human nature, and they are faced so many temptations. But meanwhile, they are suffered from the pressure of make a living. They comparing with each others, and sometimes they think that the process is not important. Everything should be efficient, and they just very busy to go to that destination, but they just skip the process of their life. All these things we enjoyed here in Iowa City, the music, the literature, all these happy feelings in our life. We accompany our families. All these things, they skip it. They just think it's useless. And I think literature, actually, I think literature is kind of gland in the body of society. And they may think that that GDP is very important. It's more important than anything. But I think if we don't have that gland in our body, we will definitely got sick and die. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a feeling that perhaps Angie and Chris could say is common from people who, look at the world from a thoughtful perspective here in this country and in other places as well. Can you respond to the sorts of, looking at all the writers you see every year in the residency and some of the themes they work on? Is this a common theme?
I think the larger theme would be trying to find meaning in contemporary existence. And we have writers from so many different cultures, so many different societies. In China, maybe trying to find meaning in the midst of a rapidly growing economy is different than, I'm thinking of my friend from Zimbabwe, who's written a play while he was here, addressing different kinds of matters. It has to do more with freedom and freedom of expression. And our writers from the Arab world who are responding in one way or another to the Arab uprising of the last couple of years. In each case, the writers are in some fashion trying to discover meaning about their experiences here, whether they are experiences they've had or that they are imagining. And I think what's interesting is to see the writers in conversation with each other about the different things that they're facing. You mentioned our writer from Afghanistan, Mohib Zagam, who is also, as it happens, a cardiologist. For some reason, we often have a doctor in the house, and I think that's very useful. You should always have a doctor around writers because you never know what's going to happen. But I remember one event, Mohib suddenly started talking from the perspective of a doctor, how a doctor would diagnose a patient. And I thought, oh, that's just, it's a different way that he's got a different angle of vision. And I thought that's really at the heart of what the IWP is. We just bring one different angle of vision. And we're all trying to, a friend of mine once said about writers, he said, we're all just cannon fodder. I mean, we're all trying to write something that will last, and who knows which pieces will last, but the common activity of trying to make sense with words is what fuels us.
Yeah. And Angie, you're trying to make sense with words through film, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think we're all trying to make sense of what's the meaning of life with life, I think, right? Your question?
Is your work exclusively in documentary?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think that kind of reflects what Chris and Sun Wei is saying, is that I think we all, for me, I think life is the meaning of life maybe is that it's full of challenges, and for me personally, I think it's the passion that you feel for what you do is the most important thing. Whether you're a writer or you're a filmmaker or you're a repairman and anything, as long as you have passion and you have respect for the kind of work you do, I think, and that makes it meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the meaning.
Well, please thank Angie Chen and Sun Wei for joining us this evening. Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Ed Folsom to join us. He is going to sit with Chris here for a minute and talk about some of the very, very interesting international and interactive things that the IWP, International Writing Program, is doing. Hi, Ed. Ed Folsom is Carver Professor of American Literature in the Department of English at the University of Iowa. He's an internationally renowned scholar of Walt Whitman's work and Whitman's relationship to various elements of American culture, including photography, dictionaries, and baseball. Great to have you with us here, Ed, and I'm sure it'll be fun to hear about all this Whitman work. And I'd like to first go to a brief discussion of something called Book Wings that I think you, Chris, can tell us about.
Well, as I said, we try to do some other kinds of projects. And a few years ago, I was in Moscow for a bilateral presidential commission to reset relations between the United States and Russia. And the director of the Moscow Art Theater jumped up in the middle of a meeting and he said, "We've trained 1,000 American actors in the Stanislavski method over the last 20 years, and now I can talk to my daughter every night by Skype in Boston. Can't we figure out some way to do something together?" And I seized on this idea. I thought we would figure something out. And what we did was we commissioned 4 young writers, 4 young Russian writers and 4 young American writers to write new pieces on the theme of contact. And then we got Alan McVeigh and his colleagues in our theater department to work to stage these plays. So on a single day, we staged these 4 plays in Iowa City at 10 o'clock in the morning and in Moscow at 8 o'clock at night, and we did it over the internet. And we went back and forth talking with the actors and the directors in Moscow and in Iowa City. So it worked out beautifully. And then the State Department said, okay, that was fun. What do you think about trying to do that with Chinese playwrights and actors? And so we thought, well, that sounds interesting. It will present different kinds of challenges. And one thing led to another, and next March we'll have 3 American playwrights and 3 Chinese playwrights put on a show, again, early in the morning here or late at night here, I'm not sure which it is, and simultaneously. On the Internet 2 platform, we'll have actors doing each other's plays, talking back and forth. And as it happens, in that same week, we'll use 3 other American playwrights and 3 Russian playwrights. So we're going to have a festival of people working in Shanghai and Moscow and Iowa City, just trying to see what can be done in common, writing on a theme, working up a play, turning it into something to stage, hoping the internet connection lasts.
Yeah. So, I mean, why is that especially fun for writers? Why do writers need to be around other writers?
Well, writers are usually in their rooms, and actually the writers this year did something really very clever. They've just made a website called 26 Rooms, where you can go on to the web and see what's inside each of the rooms of the different writers here. It's just that all you can see is the room number. You don't know who the writers are, unless, as one writer noticed today, we all have the list of where the writers have been staying, but you get a glimpse into their solitary lives. But also, writers at the end of the day are also often social creatures. They want to get out and do something and see what might happen in conversation with another writer. And so that aspect of collaboration has been a part of what we do. And it's, it can be fun, it can be an experiment, it can go nowhere, but occasionally it sparks something really interesting.
Yeah, no. Ed, you've been the organizer and the lead scholar of a number of Whitman symposia around the world, conferences, various meetings of one kind or another, and I guess you directed one in Beijing in 2000, and your book, Whitman, East and West, gathers together some of the thoughts of the scholars who participated in that conversation in Beijing. Tell us why people around the world are interested in Whitman.
Whitman has had an amazing life in many different cultures. And one of the things that I think attracts readers internationally is that Whitman lends himself to cultural translation. That is, he becomes a quite different figure in different cultures. In India, for instance, Whitman is often read as a Western yoga master. And you will find books that read Whitman's Song of Myself as yoga discipline, Western yoga discipline, with titles like Maha Yoga Walt Whitman. And in Germany, when we went through the period of East and West Germany, two very different Whitmans developed in those two different cultures. He was translated differently. He was seen very much as a proto-socialist in the Eastern German perspective, and in the Western German perspective, very much as the spokesperson for a kind of developing liberal democracy. And we can go around the world, and Whitman seems to be absorbed in different ways by different cultures. I had a seminar here last year where I brought in translators from 6 different countries to deal with translations of Whitman. And we looked at single Whitman poems, short Whitman poems, and gathered all the translations of those particular poems in all of the languages that were represented. So we were looking in some cases at maybe 50 or 60 translations in different languages of a single Whitman poem. And one of the things we discovered in reading those translations is how much Native American speakers, Native English speakers in America, can learn about their own language and their own poetry by coming at it through the translations of 50 translators who have tried to put that poem into another language and into another culture. As we would back translate those poems into English, we could begin to see that many of the translators solved most of the problems of the poem in very similar ways. But there were always 3 or 4 places in every poem that the translators disagreed radically about how to translate that particular image, that particular word, that particular turn in the poem. And in every case, those places, those problematic little nodes in the poem, when we looked at the poem again in English, may have been places that we read right over, but we could almost immediately see that, in fact, one of the great ambiguities in the language was right there. And that the poems began to open up in ways that those of us who were native English speakers had never seen before. We all felt that we understood the poems in ways that we would have never understood it had we not come at them through 50 different translators trying to put it into another language. So translation is not just moving from one language to another, but it also has a tremendous power to teach native speakers about their own language, because every translation, we always say this, every translation is an interpretation. And only when you really sit down with all those translations of a single poem do you realize how true that is and how those interpretations can really help you understand your own poetry in your own language.
Mm-hmm. Well, for those of us here in the States, and many who may not have read much Whitman since the days they were in school, why is the poetry of Walt Whitman, in your view, so definitive in terms of the American spirit or a period in our history? What is it about Whitman that is real today?
Well, that's a big question, and there are, I think, huge answers to that question. But certainly one thing that I think is intriguing to readers of Whitman in all languages is that he's trying to create a voice, construct the I, that is speaking a truly democratic language. And by that, I don't mean a political language or a governmental language of any sort, not democracy as a structure of government and polity, but rather democracy as a way of thinking and a way of interacting with everyone in the culture. It's a radical kind of thinking. And Whitman was trying to construct an eye that was open and absorptive of all the things around him, an indiscriminate eye, a non-discriminating, but even beyond non-discriminating, indiscriminate eye, one that would take in everything in the culture. How radical could a self be that opened itself to every idea in a culture, to every version of diversity in a culture? What would that self be like that was as open as a self could possibly be and yet maintain some sort of individuality? I think that's a fascinating problem that Whitman was developing. He certainly knew in his own life that he himself had all kinds of biases and discriminations, but he was trying to invent a voice and project a voice that went beyond that. Imagine a voice that someday, he believed, might be the voice that we all shared, a voice that opened itself entirely to a diverse and complex world, and instead of shutting itself off to parts of that world, opened itself up to it all.
Earlier when I was introducing you, I mentioned something that I found in a bio of yours, that Whitman had, Whitman and photography have a relationship. Also baseball. We can't really leave this segment without talking a little bit about those two things.
Yeah, well, Whitman, and for Walt Whitman, who photography began more or less in 1839 in America, as the world very quickly in the 1840s became a photographed world for the first time. And Whitman was a young man when this occurred, and he took immediately to photography and began to think about photography as the truly democratic art form. He believed that the camera had given humans access to an image, a representation of the world that was truly democratic in the sense that it did not discriminate. Whatever the sun shined on made its way into the photographic field. And so for Whitman, a photographic plate was the ultimate democratic imagination. You opened it to a world, and everything had its place in that world. So where many people at the beginning of photography really disliked the medium and saw it as something that might help artists create better canvases, Whitman said, no. Photographers are going to be the democratic artists, because what photography does that painting does not do is it gives everything its place. And we redefine beauty. Beauty is not editing out the ugly or the unpleasant. Beauty is allowing everything that before we had thought of as extraneous, as debased. Everything has its place. And beauty now is no longer editing things out. Beauty is understood as fullness, completion. And photography was teaching us how to be full and complete. I think in a lot of ways, Whitman, in his own poetry, was trying to invent a linguistic form, a form of words that was as open to the world as a photographic plate was open to the things of the world.
And so what's the connection with baseball?
Well, the baseball, Whitman was our first writer to recognize baseball as the national sport. Very early on, again, Whitman was in the middle of the invention of baseball and the development of baseball in New York and New Jersey, and some of the earliest baseball teams were made up of friends of Whitman's in Brooklyn. And as baseball developed, Whitman said, you know, this has, his words were the snap, go, and fling of the American character. It was the America's game, and he followed it his whole life. One of the things I think Whitman really admired about baseball was that baseball players, when they were on the baseball field, had a kind of ease with each other. It was the only place you could see males interact with each other in physical ways. They'd pat each other on the rear end when they'd come around, and people didn't think it was strange. They just thought it was the way baseball is played. And so that camaraderie that Whitman sensed on the field of baseball was something that he, again, imagined eventually would carry over into the American character more generally. He always felt that the English language, as vast and as open as it was to bringing in words, diction from other languages, that it was remarkably sparse in its words for affectional relationships between people. We had the word friend and we had the word lover, but those million gradations in between were unnamed. And so Whitman was always looking all over the culture for places that might name those nameless relationships on which human interaction is based.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons we wanted to talk about Whitman on this program is that you are working together to create something called the Whitman Web. So, Chris, maybe you can give us a sort of a general idea of what this is.
Well, I think the idea began with Ed doing a seminar for the IWP writers some years ago, in which he had collected all the photographs of Whitman, who was, I think, one of the most photographed figures of the 19th century, and took us through them. So I have a feeling the seed got planted there. And then we were invited to come up with some kind of an idea about some literary idea that we could do on the web. And I had this brainstorm that if we spent a year looking at his great poem, Song of Myself, which happens to be in 52 parts, I thought, what if we issue a part every week with a commentary by Ed, an introduction by Ed, and an afterword by me, and used all these photographs, and then did it in as many translations as we could get. And that's how we began to create the Whitman Web. So we just released the second section today, thanks to Natasha Duravicheva and her team of Lauren Haldeman and Matt Arendt and Mode Akwe. They have created in incredible short time a website that has the poems in the original English, but also in Russian translation, Chinese, Portuguese, the first translation ever into Persian, Ukrainian, Spanish, German, French, and just last week in Baghdad, in Russian, and last week in Baghdad, we tracked down a copy of an Arabic translation. So when we release Whitman Web 2.0, we'll have it in Arabic, and we're getting the commentaries translated into Russian, Persian, and soon into Chinese and Arabic. So the idea is to have a conversation over the course of the year. We got Eric Forsyth to record the most beautiful. He's recorded the whole of the poem. It's extremely beautiful, and the Persian translator is also recording it in Persian, and so it's a big website with lots of interesting things going on.
And if you want to get to it, you really should, if for no other reason than to listen to the first two sections of Song of Myself in Persian. Yeah. It is an experience for the ears that your ears will not forget. And all you need to do is go onto Google and type in IWP for International Writing Program, type in IWP Whitman, and the first thing that'll pop up is a story about why we're doing this project, and the second thing will be the project itself. And you can click on it, and over the next year, take 15 minutes a week and read another section of Song of Myself, and listen to it in both English with Eric Forsyth's amazing reading of it, and also in Persian, and any other languages you happen to know and want to see what it looks like and read what the poem sounds like. We have translations from early 20th century to absolutely contemporary represented on that website. So it's a feast for the eyes and the ears.
And so all 52 weeks as the year goes along, they'll all be available. You don't, if you miss it 1 week, you can go back and find it later. Yeah, great.
But you can't go, you can only go farther ahead to read the poem, but the commentaries are still being written. And some are writing them faster than others.
Yeah, wow, well, thank you for sharing that. That sounds fantastic, and I appreciate it. And thank you, Ed, for telling us something about your work with Whitman. And thank you, Chris, for being up here with me all this time. Thanks so much. So now, in this last few minutes, we're going to talk to 4 of the writers who have been here during these last 10 weeks, IWP writers, and Stephanie, Stephanie, please come, and Lin Chanying, Rodrigo Lopez, hello, and also Alina Dadayeva. Hello, Alina, nice to meet you. So with these folks, we're just going to talk casually about what the experience of being in the International Writing Program, coming to a place called Iowa, what that has meant to them, to their writing, and I think that I will start first. Well, you've met Stephanie here in the black dress. You've met Lin Chanying, and at the far end we have Alina Dadayeva, and she's a poet and fiction writer from Uzbekistan who's worked widely as a reporter and a correspondent. Her poetry has appeared in many literary publications, and her first collection of poetry was published in 2010. So thank you for being with us tonight. And next to me is Rodrigo Lopez, a poet and translator from Brazil. Rodrigo has published 5 collections of poetry, and his work has been widely published and anthologized. His second CD, called Songs from Reality Studio, a new book of poems, and a first novel are coming yet this year. Rodrigo translates from the English. He translates Whitman, Laura Riding, and Sylvia Plath, and from the French, Rimbaud and Apollinaire. He co-edits the arts magazine Coyote and performs his poems and songs regularly around Brazil. So let's start with you, Alina. What has your experience been like here in Iowa? Was it what you expected?
That I got this possibility to go to Iowa City and to be here in IWP program. I phoned one of my best friends and I told him, I'm waiting for your congratulations. I'm going to the City of Literature to be here for 3 months. And he told, yeah, okay. And I'm going to the moon to be there forever. Yeah, that's why it's really difficult for people. A lot of people know about this program now, thanks to IWP. But millions of people in the world, they won't be able to believe that such kind of thing exists. Because it's really difficult. Our world is so focused on such kind of things as business, money, politics, that many people can believe that somewhere there is the City of Literature where almost all the writers live, where literature is the first thing to think about, where there are so many literary readings, literary meetings, and that's really happiness that you, all of you, that you live there, here, and you, our guys, have the possibility to attend this. That's why thank you for this happiness that you shared with us. Thank you very much.
Well, we're happy that you are here. And what city are you from?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm from Tashkent, it's the capital of Uzbekistan. That's really big city, but you know, when I try to compare our Tashkent and Iowa City, it seems that Iowa City is bigger for me, because there are so many places where I want to attend. That territory, the distance means nothing. The more places, the more people you want to meet, the bigger city is for you.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, let me ask Rodrigo for your impressions of this experience as well.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to begin my participation with a quote by Ezra Pound, who was a very important American poet for me, for my formation. And he says something that we have to think of every time. If a nation's literature declines, the nation atrophies and decays. A nation which neglects the perceptions of its artists declines, after which it ceases to act and merely survive. So Pound's phrase is very important for me in a way that a country that doesn't value its own writers is a country that is neglecting language. And language, I believe, that's our common house, our common home. So that's why I believe that we are here for a very important thing. And literature is not only something that happens in books. I have to remind that literature is always between, be it between pages, between people, between different oral experiences like life experiences. And it's important to mention a phrase that Paulo Leminski, he's a Brazilian poet, he says that poetry is useless, or poetry is a utensil, in the sense that in a society where everything has a price, everything is a commodity, maybe poetry is a kind of ecological reservation, in the sense that is the place where language is really being taken care of. And I can only say that we have so much to learn, we Brazilians, with what happens here, for instance, with this kind of program. Initiatives like this, like 45 years, a program like this. And before coming here, I went to check out who were the Brazilians who were here before, like since 60-something. And I was amazed to find like 5 or 6 of our best contemporary Brazilian writers on that list. So okay, that's a good omen. Maybe I will one day be, and these guys would be like people like Bernardo Carvalho, João Baldo Ribeiro, João Gilberto Noll, Luiz Vilela, and Amilcar Bétega, who are among the best contemporary Brazilian writers. So I'd just like to tell, there is a carnival march in Brazil that goes like this: ay, 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 I guess time is coming. Day is breaking, sweetheart, and I have to go away.
Well, sorry you'll be leaving, because this, I think, is the last week for your
Yes.
residency here in Iowa City. Oh, thank you. Stephanie, what do you think about this experience now that you've been here for these many weeks?
Right. Yeah, Iowa has just been such an eye-opening experience for me. It's thanks to the IWP that I had my first encounter with a Republican. It wasn't in Iowa City, actually. For a mid-residency trip, we went to, some of us went to New Orleans. So I was there in this jazz bar called the Spotted Cat, and this handsome, tall, blonde guy comes up to me and he starts talking to me. And it turns out he's from Mississippi. Yeah, so, we're having a nice chat, and then he asked me where I'm from, etc. And then he asked, so what do people outside of the US think of Obama? And I'm like, oh my gosh, we love him so much. He's so great. We all wish he were our president. And then I realized that his face was like, and then I was like, oh, right, he's a Southerner. He's probably a Republican. So anyway, but he was very polite being Southern, he was just totally, very nice to me still, and we continued to have a pleasant conversation. But anyway, I don't know if this will ever come up in my writing. I don't know if I'll ever be able to use this, but I think that kind of represents to me how the IWP has really shown me another side of the US. This is not my first time in the US. I did my undergraduate degree here in the Midwest, actually, at the University of Chicago, on the south side of the city in Hyde Park, otherwise known as Obama Land. So I guess even though I have experience in the US, I've always been in this kind of little urban liberal bubble. And just coming to Iowa City, even though Iowa is very liberal as well, the program has made it an effort to bring all of us to different parts, to have a different experience of the US than what most of us would get just visiting the big cities. like one of the most memorable trips that we took was to a rodeo. It was a rodeo somewhere like elsewhere in Iowa, and that was truly something special, I think, for all of us. Like just seeing how patriotic. I mean, they played the Star Spangled Banner, and then like to coordinate with like the last notes, they had this skydiver come down, like, and land in the middle of the rodeo arena with a huge American flag. And I mean, that was a pretty interesting look at a different part of the U.S., like a different kind of culture than what we're usually exposed to. So, to be honest, I don't know if I will actually explicitly refer to my time in Iowa in my writing, but I do think that just opening my mind up to a different experience here in Iowa, like that can only enrich my writing, I think. It just broadens your mind, and it forces you to think of things which otherwise you might not even want to think about, just because it is so easy to just stay stuck in your little bubble and just associate with things that you're comfortable with, that you're used to, that you like. So I think for me, that's the real gift of the IWP, just taking us all to these different experiences.
Yeah, oh, thank you, Stephanie. And Lynn, what would you have to say about your time here?
Okay, sure, because I got the question a few days ago, so I wrote it down. I think it will be, more organized and clear. I always thought that writers are independent. Every writer is like an island, because when he or she is writing, he is complete on his own. But I think the IWP has given me a different point of view about it. I never expected to meet or know so many writers from different countries with different language. I think it's like a universe. It's my opinion, like the public of literature or the public of writer. This year we have 31 writers from 28 countries, and to me every writer has inspired me in some way, even the way they are smoking, drinking, or joking. I cannot just describe it with my words. But all in all, the IWP has made me feel it's a pride to be a writer. And I have made a right and a great choice for my life. And I cannot say how or how much the IWP will affect my writing in the future, but it's too early to say it. But I remember Mr. Paul Engle's poet, I cannot move the mountain, but I can light. And I think exactly the IWP has enlightened me. And thank you very much. I am so grateful to everyone in the IWP office and so many people in the Iowa City. And most of all, I'm so grateful to Mrs. Engle. I always call her Teacher Nie 老师. I cannot just call her name. So thank you, 聂老师.
So we have a few minutes here at the end of the program. I don't know if any of you brought anything to read from your own work, but I did ask Rodrigo if he had something he could share. I think even something you've written while you were here.
Yeah, I'd just like to say some few words. What you were talking about, feeling proud, because I feel like that I'm more valued as a poet outside Brazil than in Brazil sometimes. And I really would like to say how important this program is and what experience this has been. Although very short, I was a latecomer here, but I really appreciated getting to hear and getting to know more. I will write a poem, and I won't tell the truth that I wrote this poem here, but it's very similar to a situation. This is called Written in a Hotel, but I put the title of Written in Iowa House Hotel, which is where everybody's staying but me. what makes us write if even while time, the mind's writing, denies that it's there to entertain, until time closes, until light obliges. The first gesture that detonates it is the echo of the word that devours it, bones and stuffing on exhibit as it comes of its own impulse, the master. It is to confuse the registers. A light in a room announces itself, and to become even more lucid, a distracted hand writes us and stops. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Have you been writing while you were here, Alina?
You know, as one of my friends who is photographer says, one day we were in the mountains and we went there to him make photos. He is very fond of photos, and we have been spent in the mountains maybe 5 hours, and he didn't done any of his photos. And in 5 hours I asked him, why are you not shooting anything? And he told, what? I'm shooting. Now I just should put the button and everything is ready. So he told about his absorbing. That absorbing is much more than writing. Of course, I have written here, maybe not so much as I expected, but I don't know, it's not because of I had an inspiration here, but as soon as I come to Tashkent back, I will do everything, and maybe much more better than I do here, because here it's time to make impressions, to get them, to inspire maybe for writing them. And maybe as the last word, I want to read a small piece of a poem of a great Russian poet, Sergei Yesenin. It's about last farewell, and he tells that there is one day when we meet together. Only a small piece. До свидания, друг мой, до свидания. Милый мой, ты у меня в груди. Предназначенное расставание обещает встречу впереди. Спасибо. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, do you have something you'd like to say, Stephanie?
Yeah, actually, I brought a poem to read, which I actually did write in Iowa House Hotel, because I actually do live there. But anyway, I wrote it because a few of us were asked to write like a small piece, which this dance company in New York City called Battery Dance Company, they'll basically be performing dances inspired by our pieces on Veterans Day at Ellis Island, which I'm sure most of you know is where the ancestors of more than half of Americans passed through Ellis Island when they were immigrating into here. And I thought the commission was quite weird, given that the very fact that we're all international writers means that none of us have ancestors who passed through Ellis Island. But anyway, the title of my poem is called The Stars, and something like, I was a little bit inspired by Iowa City, because where I come from in Singapore, Singapore's a really big city. It's a small country, but a big city. But so we get a lot of light pollution, so if you look up at the sky, you don't really see that many stars. But here in Iowa City, when you're stumbling home from the pub, from the Foxhead, and you look up at the sky, you actually see all these beautiful constellations. So that's an image of Iowa City that will always stay with me, and that is partly what inspired this poem, which I've written, called The Stars. There are stars whose light we will never see, they say, because the universe is constantly expanding. The stars, racing to all the infinite corners of infinite space, their light, too slow to ever make up the growing distance from our gaze. This is why the stars shine lonely in the dark night sky, rather than merge in their multitudes in a seamless sweep of light. And this is what you tell your children when they ask about the gaps in the family story. We are all moving so fast and so ceaselessly, names, creeds, customs dropping away like so many light years, as we blaze our irrevocable trails into the unknown. But at each of our cores burns the same strange, mad matter. And though we might die, never seeing the light from one another, Maybe someday, somewhere, someone else will watch the night sky and see us all, our starlight, forming our own constellation. Thank you.
Wow, well, thank you. Beautiful way to end our program. We've been joined here by Alina Dadaeva, by Lin Chunying, by Stephanie Ye, and by Rodrigo Lopez. Thank you. We have come to the end of our program, and I'd like to say thanks to everyone who was with us this evening. Special appreciation going to International Impact Award winner Hualing Nieh Engle, Christopher Merrill, and the wonderful staff of the IWP, as well as former President Sandy Boyd. Thank you all for coming here, and WorldCanvass is a production of international programs at the University of Iowa. Our partners are UI TV, the UI Pentecrest Museums, KRUI, and Information Technology Services. And you can catch this program on UI TV all around the state and on iTunes in our podcast series. So please join us in this room on December 7th at 5 o'clock. And that program will be on globalization and the world economy. Thanks to my production colleagues in international programs, Caitlin McBride, Amy Green, Connie Shea, Shayna Oli, and Christopher Clough, and to the UI TV technical team, which makes these broadcasts possible. That's it for tonight. I'm Joan Kjaer. Thank you so much, and join us in the reception.
Thank you.